At the end of the last module, I posed the question of why it was that Alienism's best and brightest, including Hewlings, Jackson, Ferrier and Maudsley, hot-footed it out of the asylum as fast as they possibly could. One thing is obvious, and we'll see this in this module. Alienism just did not cut it as a science, and these fellas were all scientists with a capital S. It's significant that they all sided with the brain and the mind-brain identity problem and believed firmly that mental diseases were brain diseases. They also adhered to what, in retrospect, can be regarded as an unhealthy view of human development, which saw madness as an inevitable outcome of human evolution's encounter with the depravities of contemporary civilization, the result being degeneration. Of this, more later. But it's not enough to say that there just wasn't enough science in alienism for these men's tastes. It went further than that. And this is the issue that we will explore now by examining two related areas. Firstly, the professional lives of alienists as they went about their business within the asylum walls. And secondly, the inherent flaw that had been at the heart of moral therapy from its very earliest of days. One simple answer lies in the fact that with the increase in numbers, it was impossible to carry out the moral therapeutic program as envisaged. Indeed, moral therapy as a means of cure seemed to have failed in the large numbers of intractable cases. This made the role of the alienist more akin to a manager than a medical doctor. We can see this in the story told by Ernest Jones in his memoir. Jones was to become one of the brightest followers of Freud in the early 20th century. He'd followed a fairly typical path from medicine to psychiatry, but in 1905 had come across Freud's Dora case and began dabbling in psychoanalysis. This landed him in considerable difficulties on at least two occasions. In 1906 he was arrested for indecently assaulting two children at a home for mental defectives, where he was visiting as an inspector of schools. He claimed on Freudian grounds that the children were fantasizing, and at the initial hearing it was decided the case should be dismissed, as no jury would trust the testimony of such children. Again, in 1908, Jones had been challenged by a colleague to demonstrate the underlying sexual trauma that had caused paralysis in the arm of an adolescent girl. This he duly did, either through hypnosis or free association, but without consent from the girl's consultant or a chaperone being present in the room. He faced complaints from the girl's parents and was forced to resign his hospital post. He may have been a slippery character, or this may have been the price for his Freudian leanings. Certainly he went on to become a prominent psychoanalyst, one of the most prominent of the day, and he had nothing but contempt for the asylum psychiatrist. Two Jones stories. When I was holding a resident appointment at University College Hospital, an asylum superintendent, whom I had met, telephoned saying he had a vacancy on his staff and could I think of anyone who would be willing to fill it. He added, "I don't expect him to be interested in insanity, but he must be able to play cricket with the patients." And then, I remember a satirical friend of mine, himself an amateur psychologist, asking me once what alienists discussed at their meetings. "I suppose they read papers on an improved variety of chublock." In other words, playing cricket and figuring out the best ways to keep the patients in their wards was the business of the asylum psychiatrist. The trouble was that this wasn't that far from the truth. For one thing, the General Medical Council, which had been established in 1858, had failed to sanction psychiatry as part of the general curriculum for medical training. For another, aside from the laboratories like West Riding, there was very little concrete scientific research going on into insanity. This compared unfavourably with countries like Germany, where the laboratory method was king in terms of attempting to understand the conundrum of the mind. As we will see, Germany had claims to being the home of biological psychiatry. It was a problem recognised in Britain by some of the most powerful psychiatrists in the land. Commenting upon a report of 1889 undertaken by London County Council, which had a number of asylums within its boundaries, having absorbed Middlesex and parts of Essex, Surrey and Kent, David Yellowlees, the president of the Medico-Psychological Association, the principal society for psychiatrists, commented upon the accusations that in asylums, the amelioration in the surroundings of the insane has been due to humanity rather than medical skill, and that from being shut up in asylums, the insane were removed from the ordinary scope of medical observation and from the influence of the progress of medical science. The excuse for this statement is found in the assertion that asylum superintendents are mere administrators or house stewards and have neither the training nor time nor the capacity for medical investigation. As much as he then went on to attempt to counter this accusation, it was hard to disagree, particularly as the next article in the journal, where his speech was printed, was about the heating, ventilation and electric lighting of the hospital at the Montrose Royal Asylum. This was, in a nutshell, the problem of moral therapy within the asylum, and it had been there right from the very start. The birth of moral therapy provided two bequests. Let's name them the Lockean and the Tukean. Locke develops a theory of the mind where the mind can be put right by persuasion, not medicine. The Tukean bequest is Locke made concrete. Sanity can be restored through kindliness, authority and order. In both bequests we are left with a question. In both bequests we are left with a demand. Show me the medicine. As Tuke demonstrated, you did not need to be medically qualified to head up an asylum. And yet this was what happened. Medically qualified superintendents were ordained by the law, and the asylum became the principal venue for the practice of psychiatry as it emerged out of mad doctoring. Ultimately, because of these factors, moral therapy had to die. But the death of moral therapy did not signify the death of the asylum. These institutions lingered until the end of the 20th century and remained absolutely integral to the treatment of mental ill health. Although their names evolved, they became mental hospitals or state hospitals, but certainly not asylums for the insane. They remained one of the central places for the training and practice of psychiatry. Certainly, the spaces and places of psychiatry became increasingly varied, particularly with the advent of psychoanalysis as a therapy. Here, the psychiatrist could practice calmly, thoroughly, peacefully in his consulting rooms, seeing patient after patient, week upon week, month upon month, and year upon year. In the USA, psychoanalysis got many psychiatrists out of the asylum and into lucrative practice, where they barely see a psychotic symptom. Nerves and psychodynamic developments were the stock in trade for these practitioners. We will talk about this model more when we discuss Freudianism. Equally, the laboratory remained particularly important in German culture. The laboratory at the University of Heidelberg, which in the late 19th and early 20th century was run by the great classifier of mental illnesses Kraepelin, would boast some of the greatest names of the mind sciences, men who worked zealously to demonstrate the biological basis of mental illness. Alzheimer was typical of these. But the asylum would not die. With no effective treatment for severe psychotic disorders and no social welfare system beyond institutionalization to care for those who had congenital conditions, the asylums were needed to care for these individuals. Increasingly, though, they would become warehouses of the mad, overseen by psychiatrists who would be prepared to test any method that might alleviate one of humanity's greatest problems.